My name's Carla Inderrieden. As Tim said, I am my official title is Sustainability Coordinator for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. I've been in the role just under 10 years. I'll just about hit 10 years here in a bit. And just broadly speaking, what does that mean? It means that I work on things like energy, water, our fleet vehicles, greenhouse gas emissions, our waste, our recycling, our procurement, what we buy at the state, anything that could possibly have an impact on how responsible we are in our operations, I touch. And that's not just the MPCA. I actually work with all of the state agencies and the Office of State Procurement, so that I'm impacting kind of all the contracts that we use, which impacts schools and anybody who's a government entity. So really kind of touching everything. I work with the stadiums and large festivals and events on their sustainability, work with the Fortune 500 companies through the sustainability kind of director network. So kind of touching anything and everything that needs help, I'm a resource for. And then I also do cultural competency coaching and equity coaching, so kind of the social side of sustainability as well. So that's my day job. I love it. I'm also a cat adoption coordinator and a foster mentor for Pet Haven in St. Paul, and I'm mostly focused on cats. And so if you have cat questions, I love cats as well. I love dogs too, but my husband won't let me have dogs, so cats it is. So yes, that's kind of my little spiel. But here today, I'm here to talk about that State Fair Comprehensive Waste Study. And so today it's a huge study. I spent a lot of time putting this together. And so obviously can't go through everything, but Tim's going to send out the actual study and the document after this. But I'm just going to kind of touch on the high level findings and how you all were very helpful in getting this done and what we are going to try to do next, the recommendations that we're providing the State Fair and kind of what's coming. So introduction, objectives, and methodology, just to kind of lay the groundwork of why we did this and how, those findings and those recommendations. So introduction, this is a organics dumpster behind the food building. And you can see that though it does have some contamination with those labels from the pineapples, there's pretty good, clean dumpster here. So that's exciting. But why a waste study? So kind of part of this introduction is just laying the groundwork. Why did we want to do this? And we wanted to do it because that first point, the Minnesota State Fair generates over 6 million pounds of waste each year. That's in about 12 days. So that's astronomical, right? If you think about it. So just as somebody in my role who's responsible for the sustainability of the state, I'm going to go and look at what are our biggest, contributors to waste and all these different categories of things that matter. And the state fair just jumps out, right? It's a huge anomaly. It's a huge waste generator. And so I wanted to get involved in that. And so I've actually been working with the fair for about 8 years, but kind of having mixed, engagement with them. And they're very, an entity that's very historic, and they kind of do things the way they do things. And so this was an opportunity for us to kind of give them an assessment of where things are at and give them some real tangible, here's what we saw and here's what you can do to improve. So that motivation was to further our relationship and to really improve their program, particularly to reduce waste in the first place. Let's get that number lower, but also to divert more of the waste because most of it is trash and it could be recycled or go to the organics. So there's some diversion opportunity, but even more so just reducing that overall. And then the timing was because of you all. I received an email from the State Fair that the Rotary was looking for ideas for a project. And I said, I need volunteers to get this project done that I've wanted to do for years. And here it was just handed to me on a platter. So I asked, hey, I've got this idea. Do they want to do this with me? And I was told that the Rotary was good with it. Let's go. So you all are the reason that I was able to push this forward in 2024 because I had that large volunteer mass to make it happen. And then, of course, I also sought out additional partnerships with counties and recycling ambassador programs and programs that had people who wanted or needed hours with regard to waste to do, their roles or their volunteer gigs. And so it was just a great opportunity. So that's kind of why. The objective and the methodology. So just to, be really direct, why did we, what was our clear objective? And you see some of your volunteers here. That was to conduct a waste study to understand the current program's successes and also the opportunities. And then based on those findings, provide some recommendations to the state fair so that we could really achieve that reduction and diversion. And of course, you can't manage what you don't measure. And in having worked with the state fair for quite a few years, I knew that this was something they didn't have. So I really wanted to provide this to them as a stepping stone to get us to where we wanted to go. So the methodology we used, and I say we because I put together a really small core team, which I'll talk about in a minute, but the methodology we came up with was to observe the current program, right? What are they doing today? And that involved, you can see some of your volunteers here, a street side bin study. So we called them street side bins, but it's basically if you're a fair goer, you're going to the fair and you're walking around the fairgrounds, it's the bins that you see that you can put your waste in. So those, we called them the street side bins. Then we studied the dumpsters, which were kind of what the vendors are supposed to be using. They're kind of in back alleys and different areas of the fairgrounds. And then front of house observations. What we mean by front of house is what the vendors are doing when they interact with somebody buying their product. So if you go up to Sweet Martha's counter and you ask for a bucket of cookies, what's that experience like? What are they automatically giving you? Things like that. Then the second piece was to conduct conversations with the vendors and state fair staff. So not just observe, but now actually have an engagement opportunity. So what that looked like is we talked to vendors, and that meant we knocked on the back door and we talked to the staff working back in the kitchen or the owner of the kiosk or the building. And then we talked to state fair staff. So that was all the way up in the leadership positions to folks working in each of the buildings to even folks who were emptying the trash bins. So we wanted to really understand what their experience was like. And then the last piece is we actually conducted a waste sort. And if you don't know what that is, it's where you collect a whole bunch of trash over a period of time that you determine is kind of representative of your use. And you sort through it and figure out, did things go where they should have gone, or did people put things maybe where it wasn't ideal? And then we figure out, well, why would they have done that? Was the signage bad? Was the bin overflowing? Was it not where it needed to be? There's a lot of reasons why things happen. So we wanted to do a waste sort to see how are things going on the street side where people are putting things. So we did all of these things using your volunteers. We planned and executed this over a 10-month period. And then myself and a member of the University of Minnesota's MINTAP team, which is the Minnesota Technical Assistance Program, he and I, his name's John Schrader, he and I were on site from August 6th to September 16th with 16 full days over 10 hours each day, monitoring dumpsters, bins, talking to vendors, talking to staff, doing all of these things. And then we had that 1-day waste sort as well, which is the day that we utilized most of the volunteers from the Rotary. And we've divided, so some of you, I remember, were on some of those teams, the observation team, the conversation team, which was talking to folks, and then the waste sort team who sorted those bags of trash. And I just listed a few other organizations that I was able to get volunteers from, which was the different county folks, Hennepin, Ramsey, Anoka, and Dakota, the University of Minnesota, a lot of solid waste employees in state government and city and county. And then, of course, you all, the Rotarians, which was my big volunteer mass, which was amazing. So last thing, these are just details, but I think it's helpful to know that just the scale of this, that we had over 1,000 vendors at the fair last year, and we spoke to over 400, nearly 400. I think it was like 399. So we almost got to 400. And we say dozens of fair staff because folks were really nervous about getting in trouble or saying something and then people hearing about it. So we just kind of generically say dozens of fair staff, but we talked to a lot of state fair staff as well. And then the waste sort, we went through 1,715 pounds of waste, which is a lot of Rotarian volunteers over 6 hours. And that was on one of the traditionally busiest, if not the busiest days of the fair, which was the first Saturday of the fair. And then, of course, we did a ton of data entry and data analysis from this, primarily from those conversations and those observation teams, but also the waste sort as well. And you can see the core team here, which has myself, John Schrader, who I mentioned from MINTAP in the middle there, and then Carrie Wagner from the Department of Administration that works in solid waste specifically. So she was a great lead for the waste sort. while I was running around and helping folks do the observation and the conversation work. So that's how we did this. It was a big effort, a lot of people, and we found a lot of things. So here's some of your volunteers again, digging through the trash. And I don't know if any of you were waste sorters, but that is a really interesting job. I find it fascinating. So what we learned, not just from this waste sort, but from those conversations, from all of those observations, we learned a lot of things. So we broke it into 6 areas or components, which was the waste sort, the street side bin study, the dumpster study, those front of house observations, the back of house conversations, and then the state fair staff conversations. So all of those we kind of broke down into different areas. And ultimately we came up with these findings. Now in the actual report, each of these 6 categories has very long sections detailing with photos and findings, like specific findings from each of those studies. But today, because we don't have time for that, I'll just encourage you to go look at those. I think they're really interesting. But I'm going to just give the summary of the findings here. So for successes, I have a photo there of the compost in front of the corn roast. That's the first kind of great success. We knew that that program was, we were involved in that and knew that that was going fairly well. But going and checking that and kind of keeping a bird's eye on it every day, could really see that those dumpsters were working. They were well signed. Folks understood what went in there, and it was really great. The second one was when vendors knew about a back of house organics program, they used it and appreciated it. And a back of house organics program is where it's not something that's available to the public, but when you run a restaurant in the back, if you have food waste, you have a bin to put compost in, and you can then put that in the compost dumpster. So for vendors who knew about that program, not a lot of them did, but for those who did, they used it and appreciated it. So that's a great success. Also, number 3, vendors and staff were diverting large volumes of cardboard from the trash, meaning they knew that it should go in recycling, and they were putting it in cardboard dumpsters. So that's a huge win. We were really seeing a great success rate of that and not seeing much cardboard going in the trash. The fourth one there, some specialty materials were getting a second life. And what you see there is, for example, wood chips and animal bedding. I just put those as examples. There were things that people had identified over the years that didn't have to be thrown away at the end of the fair. Excuse me, that they would be able to go ahead and find another, person or farm or somebody who could use this. And so it was getting sold or it was getting delivered to somebody after the fair. So that's a great success. It's not going in the waste stream. The next section there, waste reduction and diversion support. Number 5 there, vendors and state fair staff want to see more waste diversion and reduction efforts. And they're willing to participate as long as they get help and clear guidance. They had a really strong passion and desire for more programs. I put that in the success because, you could see it as an opportunity, and we'll talk about that, but it's a success that vendors care. A lot of these vendors are coming from all over the country. Most of the folks are, very time stressed, and, this is an intense event, and they're in and they're out. So to hear from them that this mattered to them, that they cared and they wanted to see more options, that goes a long way, right? And then the Minnesota State Fair, number 6, controls which vendors are allowed to participate in the fair, what they're allowed to do, and what the public is allowed to bring in. All of those things mean that working on the waste program and tweaking what's allowed and who can be there and what kind of things they're doing with regard to what they're bringing in, right? Which then has to be disposed of theoretically at the end. We have a lot of control is basically what that point is. So it's not as if, well, we can't do anything about it. They're just going to do this. No, actually, the state fair has a lot of control and can make a really big difference if they just say, this is how we're going to do things. And then the Minnesota State Fair, number 7, has many willing and eager partners, many low or no cost, including myself, right? Including the University of Minnesota, the counties, lots of entities that want to help because of the scale of this, because this matters, right? It makes a big difference. So we know we've got willing partners. We've got a lot of power and control through the State Fair organization and how they do things. We got people who care, and there's a lot of things going really well already. So that's awesome. So now I'm going to talk about the opportunities. So there's a couple pages on this, but I'm going to try to be high level because, like I said, there's a lot to go over here, and there's so much detail in the report. So I won't hammer to it. I'll just tell you there's lots of photos and descriptions and data to back up what I'm saying here. But the first opportunity there is that some State Fair branded plastic cups are getting recycled, but a large percentage of people think that the cup didn't belong in the bottle-shaped recycling containers. So our observation team saw over and over again people struggling to know what to do with those cups. They're plastic. They sometimes, some vendors even have compostable ones, but they look like plastic. It's confusing. They look at it, they don't know where it goes. And then the real kicker is those plastic bottles that are the recycling containers say cans and bottles only around the opening. And so people look at their cup and thought, well, it's not a can or a bottle. And so they'd throw it in the trash. So we were finding that there was confusion over where to put a plastic cup. And then the second piece was many vendors just weren't recycling bottles and cans back of house. So when they're, making their food products or whatever they're using, that they have bottles and cans in the back. We even have vendors who pour the bottles and cans of soda or beer into a cup and hand out the cup. And they were throwing all of those bottles and cans into the trash. So very obvious opportunity there to be starting to capture some of those very clear recyclables back of house where there's complete control over what happens to those, right? We're not relying on a member of the public to know what to do. So those two are big opportunities. Then the program capacity, this next category, and kind of best practice management. We have a few items here. So the first one is number 3, used cooking oil carts. So when the grease and things that when it gets to kind of past its use, they clean it out and replace it with new oil. That used cooking oil can be cleaned and recycled. But what's been happening, they have carts for that. But what's happening is the carts are high, they're tall, they're high up. People are young, a lot of high school and college students working a lot of these booths, or in some smaller folks that can't reach, and it's getting dumped all over. The capacity is an issue. They're overflowing. And so what's happening is you have cooking oil all over concrete and tar, which is very slippery and unsafe. So people slipping and falling, people struggling with the weight of the oil, trying to dump it over their heads. And then also where it's over grass, it's in soil, it's contaminating the soil. So it's a consistent problem kind of everywhere across the fairgrounds that that used cooking oil needs to be either handled completely differently or with different capacity. It's just not going well the way it's going. So that's one area. And we have photos of that and so on in the report. The next one, number 4, the dumpsters are often confusing for vendors and staff. They're overflowing. Most don't have clear signage. Their locations are inconsistent to the maps that are given to the vendors in some places. And the capacity just isn't up to what is created, right? And a lot of that is due to space constraints, but even so, we know it's a problem. And so you can see the photos that I have on the right there, the bottom ones, you can see that there's some overloading, there's some capacity issues. So they're like on the bottom right there, there's one little recycling dumpster, which is the wrong color. It should be blue and it's red, and it's overflowing drastically, as you can see. Same thing with that cardboard on the left-hand side, and kind of the trash, everything in that photo. And there's also an oil cart along that wall overflowing onto the tar. So lots of issues going on there that we just need to get ahead of. The last one in that category, street side bins are often alone. So either a trash can is alone or a recycling bin is alone. They're overflowing and they're highly contaminated. And I show you that in that picture, those 2 pictures on the top. I have thousands of photos that I took throughout the fair, many thousands. And so I have probably 1,000 just of lone bins overflowing throughout the fairgrounds. And you can just kind of see it's just really problematic, especially when they're not co-located, which means they're together, right? So people can choose recycling or trash in the same moment, but when they're separated, they just overflow. So we just definitely know there's a problem with capacity, right, in that case. Now, number 6, existing process barriers. So where we've got a process that's an issue, and again, photos and descriptions in the full report, but paper ticket processes are causing a large quantity of waste in both material and personnel costs because people are manually counting these tickets at the end of the fair. It's quite a cumbersome process. And so there's several booths, many booths throughout the state fairgrounds that are using paper tickets, and all of the kind of event vendors like the haunted house or Ye Old Mill ride or some of those, they're all using those paper tickets. And so that's just causing a massive amount of waste because they're giving a paper ticket. The next person takes the paper ticket and throws it in a bin and it gets counted and thrown away. So that can be done electronically and save a ton of waste there. And just personnel time. And then that next one is vendors doing paper sweepstakes or prize drawings. That's creating a significant amount of waste. And we can do that electronically. And what we've been told consistently by those vendors is that they get much higher engagement and better results from having people do the signing up electronically anyway than they do with the paper, which I thought was interesting. So really just a piece of the state fair's policies and the way that they expect people to do things could be adjusted and could save a ton of waste right there. Demand for program expansion. Many vendors suggested an award or recognition program. They wanted to see them getting some credit or attention for doing the right thing and diverting waste. Some really wanted to see a designated area for reusable items because many of them were talking about how they travel here for the fair, they leave again, they don't have any room. So when they get here, they just buy everything they need and then they throw it away at the end. And we're talking about things like ladders and chairs, furniture, rugs, like tools just to put their stuff together and take it apart. They're that tight traveling across the country, whatever, with their loads that they just buy it and throw it away at the end. And so if there could be some sort of reuse or some rental market that they could use for those things, that would be better, right? And then number 10, state fair buildings do not have recycling or organics bins. They only have trash bins in the buildings. Yet many have a ton of recyclable material, right? Like tons of paper being given out. And some, like some of the food buildings, have a lot of compostable materials. And all of this content is going into the trash right now. So again, another very clear opportunity for some diversion. All right, I know it's a lot. I'm going to try to do faster. Some challenge areas. So several common items were identified consistently as contaminants. So we can absolutely identify like these things are things that are causing problems. Let's say vendors can't use these anymore. And we're talking about things that aren't absolutely necessary. So you, again, can see that in the report. The volume of single-use items used once or not at all and thrown in the trash is extremely high. A simple example would be those little condiment packets getting thrown straight in the trash, never opened. So very inefficient, right? That's a complete waste of resources. Many vendors are selling or giving out individually wrapped products, and those have a high volume of stretch plastic or film. You think about some of those vendors that have all of the kids' toys and games on the corners, kind of all over the place, and the lightsabers and the balloons, they're all wrapped in plastic film. And all that plastic film is going in the trash right now. Another one was that beer gardens did not have recycling bins, which I thought was a very odd thing considering that they're all plastic cups and they have, recyclable capacity, but no, beer gardens only had trash cans. The Midway and the Kidway were using reusable cards, but you threw them in the trash after you were done with them when they could absolutely be collected and reused. So that was another opportunity. Men's restroom, this is a funny one. Men's restrooms, trash cans were often full of plastic recyclable cups. For some reason, not the women's, specifically the men's, were full of, I guess they finished their drink real quick, went to the bathroom. So we figured, okay, that's another opportunity to maybe get some of those out of the trash. Some vendors claimed that they use single-use products back of house because it made it easier to work with their health inspector. And that is a problem that we know about, where some health inspectors say, just use gloves because it's easier than me sitting here making sure you can wash your hands properly. Obviously, we would prefer that they just wash their hands properly and not rely on gloves, which can absolutely be filthy coming out of the box. So it's one of those things where, okay, it's a good thing to know about. Is there a way we can partner with the health inspector to make sure that we're including those more sustainable options? The dairy building, number 18, expressed a unique need to address the volume of liquid waste. So you can actually do liquid recycling if you collect it separately. So that was an interesting one. And 19, several vendors expressed a need for that reusables rental program. And I put that in here specifically because they're talking about, can we get a vendor in here that does rentals? And then lastly, culture and kind of organization and training. The sanitation staff, who specifically are the people emptying the trash cans, they expressed concerns over just kind of low morale and kind of attendance issues and not having the training they needed. So that's an obvious thing that we can work on. And that same sanitation team org structure isn't really set up to prioritize anything other than just try to get out there and empty the trash cans, right? Because it's so overwhelming. It's so much waste and so many people. And how do we make it so that we can be more focused on diversion and reduction? And I just have some photos here on the right-hand side that you can see a couple things. So there's some reusable items found in the dumpsters in the bottom there. And again, in the actual report, tons more photos showing things, but from food like buns on the right there and lemons on the left to basketballs and totes and perfectly good items just thrown in the dumpsters because the vendors just, didn't need them and moved on. And then also the examples above there are 4 different recycling dumpsters. And we at the state prefer that all streams of trash are black or gray, recycling is blue, and organics is green. And the dumpsters at the fairgrounds are kind of every color, but they kind of use red as much as they can for recycling. And just broadly speaking, that means biohazard in the waste world. So it's very confusing for vendors. It's very confusing for the public. Theoretically, the public shouldn't be engaging with the dumpsters too much, but this is just, it's an opportunity to fix this problem where they're very inconsistent. Even if we're trying to do the same thing, all 4 of those are supposed to be for recyclables, and all 4 of them are very different looking with very different signage. So very confusing for most people. All of these are great opportunities. So what did we recommend? I mean, I kind of alluded to a lot of it, right? But here's what we recommended. 3 main things. First, update the state fair org structure and provide training to support waste reduction and diversion. So let's make this a thing that we care about and we talk about, right? So it's not an afterthought. It's not just somebody needs to deal with that, but actually something we're proactively doing. We're trying to reduce and we're trying to divert, right? And we're talking to everybody about it. It's not just one person's job or one department's job, because everybody creates waste at the fair. Number 2, update the existing program, the way that we do waste management now, to allow for successful utilization by vendors, staff, and the public. Things like those dumpsters, things like the bins, right? So I'll talk about what those recommendations specifically are, but update what we've got going on to work better for everybody. And then lastly, 3, expand what we are doing, expand those offerings, and address the challenges that we identified to allow for this successful program. This is also going to address that potential safety concern I mentioned with the used cooking oil and some of the other issues of overflow and kind of dangerous situations that happen when the capacity isn't there. So these are kind of the 3 main things we're recommending. Now, they each have things within them, very specific details, and I'm not going to make you go through all of that, but I just have 4 slides here that explain what each thing is. So I'll just do the first part. The bullets I will not talk through, but those are the specific things within each of these things. So step 1, set goals, establish a team, and provide training. That first piece about let's get everybody on the same page. Let's make it something everybody understands that we care about. So the first thing to do there is set goals centered on waste reduction and diversion. And then how to do that we've got on the right-hand side. The second thing is then, okay, set the goals. Now we need to tell everyone about these goals, right? And give them clear expectations and guidance on how to actually meet them. So having training and executing training and having folks like myself and experts come in and partner to do that. And then number 3, create program lead positions within the state fair organization where they actually have responsibility for these things, recycling, composting, reuse, etc. Because right now we have one person who is the sanitation person, and he gets a team of temporary staff, volunteers day by day. It's just a fluctuating group of staff, and they're not easily trained because sometimes they're just volunteers for the day. Sometimes he gets some info ahead of time. Sometimes he gets none. So creating a situation where somebody who works for the fair actually has this in their job, they have responsibility, and they will actually execute this program and create some sort of metrics and monitoring and have some budget and do some of this work intentionally, right? So it's not always scrambling after, but actually working ahead. Then step 2 is to update that existing program, right? And make that work better. So that first one there is expand vendor and staff awareness. I talked about how vendors who knew about the organics program loved to use it, but a lot of vendors didn't know about it. They said they'd never heard of it, even though they were a food vendor and they had a ton of food waste. So that's an opportunity where we say, how do we get this information out to them more effectively? Because right now we know that they get it on a piece of paper inside a giant packet. How do we get them to see it and understand how to use it? And so that's where I've got some suggestions there for them. Then update all street side bins using best practices. So best practices I didn't get into in this presentation, but we have things like the color of the bins, the co-location, making sure that they're paired with each other, the clarity, the signage, if they are colored correctly, everything. So making sure that people have the greatest success of finding them, using them correctly, executing that, if we follow the actual best practices for bins and so on in public spaces, bins and signage. Then number 6 there, update all dumpsters using best practices. So I showed some photos of that, how the dumpsters were really varying for the same thing in color and signage, and very unclear what goes where. And so in the report, I go into great detail about this, but when things were signed properly, they had much better contents and what was supposed to be in them than when they weren't, which makes sense, right? So really just getting in front of this, painting the dumpsters the colors they're supposed to be, getting the labels on there, using labels that make sense. Instead of saying commingle for the red recycling dumpster, we would make the dumpster blue and it would say bottles, cans, containers, or recyclables. You know, we would make it clear what we want in there. And so that's something they can control. The State Fair owns all of their dumpsters, so it's something that we can do. And so that's one that I think is a really good first step. Address identified process barriers. This is, vague, like what were identified process barriers? Well, it was those electronic signups for drawings. It's electronic ticketing, going away from all these paper processes, right? And then setting an expectation that vendors can use reusable tokens when they do purchase to pick up. There were several vendors who were using reusables and it was working great, but a lot of vendors were printing a ticket that you then handed to the next person and then they put it on the product or whatever, grabbed what you needed and gave it to you. And it's just a lot of extra waste. There were certain vendors who were printing 4 or 5 tickets for each step of the process. And then I talked to one of those vendors and they said, well, we could easily just use a screen. We just haven't done that. We could rent them just for the fair. We just haven't done it. Nobody said we had to, right? It's just the way they've always done it, right? So there's opportunities there. So setting the expectation and just saying we want you to do this could make a huge difference for a lot of the vendors. And then number 8, address those identified waste capacity issues, knowing that we've got way overflowing dumpsters. We've got a huge problematic issue with the cooking oil overflowing and causing safety concerns and contamination concerns. So definitely something we can do there. And I have specific suggestions in the report of how they can do that and upgrade that system. And then step 3, expand the program offerings. So we've, set some expectations. We've set up the structure so that it can function around this and have some metrics and have some visibility and support. We've then upgraded the programs that we've already got to make them more effective and make them more visible to folks. And now we want to expand and we want to address areas that have been problematic that we can change things if we just, make some policy changes or add some infrastructure. So number 9 here is seek partnerships. First of all, to assist in the planning and execution. So we've got university, government, nonprofit, and consulting programs, internship programs, lots of resources, including financial resources available to the State Fair. So they have plenty of opportunities to get assistance with this beyond just having to pay people to do it. In addition, we have adding the building recycling organics collection where needed. So like I said, some buildings are food buildings. Some buildings have a ton of paper, like the education building. There's lots of buildings that have lots of recyclable or, compostable materials in high quantities, and they don't have anything to offer but trash. And so getting in front of that, getting the recycling bins to the buildings that need it, organics bins to the buildings that need it, and working with the building superintendents, making sure that it's the appropriate kind of bin for the situation, that kind of stuff. And then set guidelines. Tell the vendors that we want to get rid of some of these problem materials. So a lot of this came out from that waste sort that most of the Rotarians were doing. And also from those observation teams who were going out and seeing people were being automatically given straws and napkins and plastic forks and condiments, and they were throwing them away 5 seconds later, right? So they never even use them. So we identified what are these items that we're just finding that have been completely untouched, or automatic receipt printing that everybody threw away immediately, and just say, make it a thing that you ask if they want, or make them ask for it, right? Just don't automatically give these things away. And so you can see this list, set an expectation that vendors are recycling, set an expectation that receipts are only printed by request, and go through this list, right? There's lots of opportunities where we saw things that could pretty easily be fixed just by not making it automatic, or switching out some products and making it a lot less wasteful. So we listed those out for them. Number 12, educate vendors on safe hand washing and the utilization of reusables back of house. This is to avoid all of those single-use products that get used often just as kind of that crutch. I hate to say that, but kind of as a crutch to say, well, I was wearing a glove, so it's fine. But if you're not changing that glove, and that's very wasteful to be constantly changing gloves, you're better off, especially sustainability-wise, washing your hands, right? And so there's a lot of situations where you can use reusables and be much cleaner, much safer than if you're using a single-use product that actually comes out of a factory that is not tested for cleanliness, right? So lots of opportunities there. 13, create a vendor and staff responsible operations recognition program. We kind of called it that because we want people to get credit for doing this and doing it well. We want vendors to maybe get, I'm a green vendor, sustainable vendor of the Minnesota State Fair badge, and put it on the front of their booth, or put it in a list that gets published so that people will want to visit their booth. So giving them kind of a recognition and a motivation to do this certainly can't hurt, right? And people wanted it. They told us that they wanted that. They wanted, if they were already doing it, they wanted people to know they were already doing it. And if they weren't, they thought that would be a really good idea to motivate their own staff to do better, right? Expand recycling programs to the beer gardens. That's a no-brainer. It's not there. It should be, right? Expand the recycling program to the entrance of the bathrooms. That's because of that one anomaly we found with the men's bathrooms. And then pilot a liquid recycling program in the dairy building. There's a great couple different kinds of programs where you can collect liquids in a container. It's kind of like a funnel, and it has a little grate, so it keeps big things out. And ideally, we could try that in the dairy building and try to collect that, because they were actually saying how unsafe it is for them to even try to lift the trash bags out of the cans because they're so full of ice cream. And I don't understand it, but apparently lots of people go and they buy their dairy building ice cream and throw it away as they're walking out the building. I don't get it. But apparently it's a huge problem, and they have a ton of waste, and it's very heavy, and it's really sad. So we could collect that. And so, telling the fair, let's try to do that in this one specific building and see how it goes. 17, implement midway and kidway card collection bins for reuse or recycling. So collecting those cards, instead of throwing them in the trash, let's collect those, wipe them, and reuse them. So they already do that for the giant Ferris wheel. They're reusing their cards, so we can do it. We know we can do it. We just want to expand it to the midway and kidway. And then we want to add reusables to eliminate single-use products. This is a big one. This is kind of what I was talking about before we started, Tim, where we really want to expand reusables and get people back to doing reuse, because reuse is always more efficient than single-use products. So we really, really, really want to try where we can to phase into reusables. And so we suggested an approach where they could start with cups in the grandstand, just one place, and then start kind of move to serviceware, which is your plates or boats, the things that they serve food in, with the high sides, and silverware, right, and things like that, going to reusables and seeing how that goes in the grandstand, and then slowly working that out throughout the fairgrounds to all vendors. Because if we do this at the stadiums and we do this across Minnesota, people are going to start to get used to it. They're going to get it. Hopefully that's going to be something we can do over time. Of course, that's a big undertaking. So that one is, and it would take, a staff person dedicated to that program. So we understand that, but that's kind of where we would like to see things going. That's going to really make a difference on waste, right? And then add that reusables rental program we talked about. Maybe we can bring in a rental organization partner that can do, maybe a hardware store or rental organization that can do those ladders and those, drills and those things that we're finding in the trash that are perfectly good, but people just didn't want to travel back and forth with them. And then that last one, add a plastic film collection program for recycling. So I didn't really emphasize this on the findings, but we were finding that almost every single vendor had huge amounts of plastic film. What I'm talking about is plastic bags, whether it's bun bags or bags that toys came in or anything. Everything was wrapped in plastic film, right? And so what we want to do is that material actually can be recycled very efficiently out in Minnesota. We've got a facility in Rogers, but it needs to be collected separately and it needs to be clean and dry. So how about we try to start collecting that, have vendors collect their film, smash it into bags, into their own plastic bags, and have a delivery, have a dumpster for it, have a spot for it. And then we can really make a difference because that is a huge amount of our waste is that plastic film. So this is my last slide. Just really briefly, this is the timeline that we gave them in the report or in the study. However, what I will tell you is that we only met with the fair on July 14th. So we met with Renee Alexander and the sanitation team and the marketing team and so on to talk through the report, the study, and they've had it for a while, but we're going to meet again in October to go through the recommendations and kind of next steps. This year's fair, in just 16 days, I'm going to be conducting a survey just outside the Eco Experience building, asking folks about their experience with the waste program. Did you try to throw something away today? How did it go? What do you think about the job the fair is doing on sustainability initiatives, things like that? Trying to get some information from the fair goer, because that's really the only thing we didn't have the ability to do last year was what do people want and what are they experiencing? What do they think? We observed them, but we didn't talk to the fair goer. So we're going to do that. I'm going to do that this year at this year's fair. And then at the October conversation, bring that information to them. And they've also offered to let me add a few sustainability questions to a larger guest experience survey that they're hoping to send out in the fall to fairgoers. So I think what we would like to do with that then is to help prioritize what people are looking for and to help them justify spending some money on having people doing this work. Even though it's very cost effective to reduce waste because getting rid of waste is expensive. It still helps to know that folks want to see this, right? And vendors want to see it and staff want to see it. So I'll be working on getting, honest feedback from folks. But what I wanted to say about this timeline is that since they only really met with us in July and, again in October, this timeline is at least a year too soon. We got to move it out to start in 2026. But I left it in here because this is what's in the report. Because when I wrote it last fall, this was still sensible, but really we just push it back a year. But looking at trying to do some of these things right away, and some of these things, are continuous, and some are things that we need to do into the future and kind of in phases. So you'll see some of that is like every year for parts of the year, you're going to need to do this. But ultimately, I think it's very doable, but it's going to take commitment and folks who know what they're doing and care about it. And so, we've got myself and others that work with me who are ready resources, but there's also got to be folks on the ground every day who can do it. So, it's a give and take. But this is what we've presented with them to them. And so we'll be working through this again in October. And I'm really hopeful that everything that you all did to help make this happen is really going to lead to some real changes.